expect it. Expect that people are going to be angry. They're going to be sad. They're going to disengage. That they're going to be frustrated. Expect it. And you'll be a better transformation leader. I'm Natalia Loback, and this is the Change Course podcast. I've spent my career leading complex change and transformation in organizations. And over my career, I've discovered what makes complex transformational change stick. Connected change is all about leading successful change within the context of the organization. And here at the Change Course podcast, we're all about making change sustainable. So listen in, drop us a like, a comment, and let us know how we can help you connect and change. A reminder that opinions expressed are entirely my own. We've all seen it, and come on, we've all used different versions of it. I've even talked about it on this podcast. The change curve, come on. We all know what we're talking about, right? Kubler-Ross, any of the ones that came after. I mean, I've seen it in a bunch of different iterations, and I'm sure you have too. I mean, I recently came across another one that was really similar, but seems to have taken a hold with some of the people I'm working with, called U theory. Again, similar concept, all based on trying to describe and understand the emotional responses to change. Remember, being inside an organization, especially a really big one, means for many, many people who are doing work in that environment that you're handing over some of your autonomy and free will in order to fit inside a role, to fit inside a place in the organization where outside of that, we're in charge of our own lives. Now, I mean, not everybody. Some people do live life from a perspective that is very different from the way I might live my life or others, right? But for the most part, as, functioning adults, fully functioning adults, competent in our own domain, we do things like own our banking. We take care of our money. We feed ourselves. We feed our families. We go about our days making thousands of decisions that we own. We drive those. But when you enter the domain of work, and for many of us, that means working inside an organization, taking a salaried position. That is the reality for the vast majority of people, including myself right now. I'll get into that later. I told you I would, but not today. But for the masses of us, for the majority of us, when we walk, metaphorically, when we walk into the doors of the organization, when we open our computer at the beginning of the day, when we get onto that first Zoom call, yes, we do have some autonomy in our roles, but we don't have a whole lot of autonomy inside the organization. And yes, I know we can talk about the talent theory that goes into that and like why we try to carve out autonomy and decision making in many roles in the organization. But there is still, because of the way that organizations function and the way that organizations bring value, when we're talking about things like shareholder value, when we're talking about things like profit, right? The organization has to operate within certain boundaries in order to make that possible. And that means that not everybody can have things like decision-making authority and autonomy in the organization. So, what does that mean? When change comes to the organization, you do feel like change is happening to you. And go back in time and listen to some of the previous episodes where I talk about the difference between driving change, those two types of change, right? Change that you're in charge of. You might decide, you know what? I'm going to go and move across the country, and that is what I want to do. I'm driving that change, and you're still going to feel some emotions about it, but you're not going to feel anger. You're not going to feel frustration. You might feel some frustration if you run into, problems as you're trying to do this, but you're not going to feel frustration about the change. You're not going to feel angry that you're doing it. No, because you made the decision. You decided, I'm going to move across the country. You are doing so with a sense of openness and adventure. I'm just putting that out there so you can imagine what that might be like. But inside the organization, you might not have the ability to make those decisions. In fact, not many individuals in the organization can, or the organization wouldn't function effectively. So one of the things that you hand over when you walk inside the walls of that org is autonomy and decision-making. And so when change comes, like I said, the vast majority of people in that organization feel like change is happening to them. And sometimes that includes the leadership that might be at the forefront of leading that change too. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but I do want to talk about the emotions that come up. When change is happening to you, it brings up those negative emotions. We're all human. We have this juxtaposition in human nature. We love stability. We like to know what's going on, but then we also like novelty. Our brains get bored of these treaded, ingrained neural pathways, that tried and true path. We get bored. Our brains are like, I don't want to shut down. I got other things to do. I want to expand, but you're not letting me. So we are funny as humans because we have this need for stability. We want to conserve energy. We want to make things easy for ourselves. We figure once we've figured it out, we're like, oh, yes, okay, this is actually not that hard. I can do it. And then you have this other part of you that's like, I crave novelty. I crave new things. I kind of crave change, but I want to be in charge of it. When change happens to you, that gets disrupted. First of all, it's kicking you out of your own neural pathways that you have built and are very attached to because they save energy and make things easy for you. So it kicks you out of that neural pathway. All of a sudden you're trying to figure things out again and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Then the second piece is it's not really novelty that you want. This isn't novelty where you're like, I am deciding to do something new. I want to learn a new language and I'm excited about this and I'm stretching my brain and I'm challenging myself. No, this is you better figure out how to change or, you're going to have some negative consequences happen to you or you're fearful of that, right? So the anger, the fear, the resistance, the frustration, the disengagement, the negative emotions, right, that come with change that happens to you inside an organization are very, very real. And yes, some people who have been at this a long time can look at it and you can feel multiple emotions at the same time. You could feel frustrated, you could feel overwhelmed, you could feel tired, you could feel a little angry, sad, but you could also feel like there's some opportunity. You could feel excited, cautious, optimistic, all of those things at the same time. So the change curve is like, I think, version 1 of how we all look at this. But as we start to understand that humans are, as individuals, highly complex, and as groups, even more complex, I would say that's why I like to use the change orientation model that we've come up with at Connected Change to really highlight that negative to positive emotion spectrum. And maybe you've seen other models, like there's a spiral model that looks at the various levels of emotional response. And it's a really good one. It's quite complex, and it kind of illustrates how you as an individual may go up and down that spiral at different times. But it doesn't, in my mind, really give you a sense of the complexity. And I do like the orientation model because it kind of looks at it as a whole. And so it's not saying you can't have positive emotions with negative. Maybe having negative and positive at the same time means you're a bit more neutral, right? Like you can see some possibilities, but you're still having trouble letting go of the things that you love or the things you're attached to. And that brings some sadness or anger or frustration. But the emotional responses to change are complex. And when you bring change to a group, as always happens inside large organizations, it's always a group. It's never, the individual. So when you bring change or change happens to a large group of people inside an organization, the emotional responses are all over the place. And most of the time, this is driven by our fight or flight, our fear response. So what does that mean? So think about your brain and those neural pathways as like train tracks inside your brain and in the way that you function. Everything is going great. Your train's on the track. It's operating extremely efficiently, but all of a sudden change happens and that train goes right off the track. What does that do? That kicks your brain and your body into a fight or flight response. So agitated response. Fight or flight is, if you want to Google it, that's like, go look it up. That's how you'll find it. But there's actually 4 key responses that you're going to see when change happens. So the minute change happens and people start to realize that it is happening, they might not understand the full implication of it yet. They might not understand what it means to them, but they know change is happening. 4 key responses that your body and brain goes through. So fight. Think about emotions that go along with fight. Anger, maybe some sadness, frustration, fear, right? Flight, fear. Flight is that you're going to run away, maybe avoid a little bit, but it's a fear response. It's an overwhelm. It's, I can't take it. I really need a minute. I need to run away. I'm going to make myself unavailable. Looks like disengagement. Flight. Again, driven by fear. The third one is freeze. That also feels like overwhelm and frustration. That can also look like sadness. It can also look like disengagement and hiding, freeze. Or it can look like managing that status quo, but at a very bare minimum. Again, driven by fear. That fear of the unknown, that fear of, I don't know what's happening to me. And then the fourth one is fawn. And fawn looks like people pleasing. And so you can also see this happen where this one looks like everything is fine. I am okay. I am super optimistic about this change. I love change. Go back to the episode where we did about I love change. This is exactly what we're talking about, that fawn response. And inside the person is fearful, they're afraid, maybe they're angry, maybe they're feeling any of those emotions, right? And what they're showing on the outside is very different from what is going on inside. And so you'll see those 4 reactions every single time a change happens to a group of people. Remember, change happens too. So remember those 4 fear-based responses, because what is happening is all of those groove pathways, everything that's been going super, super fine is getting thrown off track. What happens when something gets thrown off track? You get thrown into the fear response. And people might not articulate, I'm afraid, because it feels like something different in their body. It might not be, I'm scared. In a corporate environment, people will rarely say that. I've heard it, I think, once in the entirety of my career, I'm afraid. And that was with someone that I had built a very long-term trusted relationship with. Most people will never tell you that they're afraid, but you've got to look for the behaviors and look for the responses. That's what you're going to see. And so where I think the change curve does a disservice is that it doesn't really speak to what the behaviors look like. And as a transformation leader, you have got to watch for the behaviors. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Those 4. Now, when we talk about moving through the emotions, expect those negative emotions to come. The negative emotions will happen whenever a change is introduced. And the main struggle that I see with lateral influential change leaders and also those in authoritative positions implementing change is that there is a actual fear of the negative emotions. And this idea that, well, if we delay the negative emotional response, if we delay when this happens, somehow it will go faster because there is more logical information available, or we can present a plan, we know where we're going, and people can quickly adopt and move on. And that is so untrue. Nothing could be further from the truth. And one of the areas that I have been working so hard on in the last 6 months is really talking about those emotional responses, those negative emotional responses, and why we need to face those. It's hard too, because in Western corporate culture, I feel that negative emotions are perceived as personal failings. There is a strong culture of repression of negative emotions in the workplace. And so that's why you see some of those behaviors popping up. And certainly you might not see as much fight, but you're definitely going to see flight, you're going to see freeze, and you're going to see fawn. Pay attention to what those look like, because fight is something that is deemed inappropriate. Anger is deemed inappropriate in Western corporate culture. And so those negative emotions can look a little bit different. You might see challenging, you might see frustration, you might see all sorts of other different things coming up, sadness, right? As I've talked about today. So as we move through to the positive emotions, the amazing thing here is it's an individual journey. That point of acceptance, that point of, okay, you know what, things are going to change. I got to figure out what I'm going to do about this. And those who don't make their way through that emotional journey for themselves, who stay in that place of victimhood, who can't move past it, They're often the ones who, when you look at something like the Rogers adoption curve, they're often the ones at the very end who just that last 15% that you can never convert. And remember, like, that's okay. You expect that there's going to be 15% that you never convert. But here's the thing, that journey from negative to positive, that journey of change orientation from negative to neutral to positive is an individual one. And you as a change leader, you have to confront that negative emotional hump first. Those reactions, you've got to be ready for it mentally, physically. You got to be ready for it because you have to introduce the change to give people the opportunity to go on that emotional journey for themselves. That is up to them, and they have to do it on their own. And so as you move through that process of change, yes, you can give those who are ready opportunities to participate. Absolutely, that does help and it does create positive momentum, but it is an individual journey and we can't avoid it. We have to accept that that is how change works for individuals. That is how emotions work and progress for individuals. To get to that point of acceptance, which I feel is the turning point. You can accept and move on and look to a brighter future, or you can accept and move on and say, this isn't for me. But you can't delay that point of realization, and you cannot artificially get people there without having the negative emotional responses. So you got to face it. You have to accept it. You have to expect it, prepare for it, and be ready. And do not waver in your mission or your goal. But don't think you can avoid it, because you do so only at your peril.
Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, I invite you to like, share, rate, and subscribe because it helps others find us. Change Course is brought to you by Charthouse Advisory Services and ConnectedChange.com. Our music is Levity by Emily Clausen. Show notes have moved. We're now at ConnectedChange.com. So visit us there under the Change Course podcast page, and you'll find a list of all the resources that I've mentioned here today. While you're visiting us, sign up for the Change Navigator newsletter. You'll keep on top of all things change, and every month we are sharing exclusive content and resources only with our subscribers. So don't miss out. Sign up at ConnectedChange.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to change course.